A warm welcome to St Peter Mancroft Church here in the heart of Norwich, and it's 1 o'clock on a Wednesday when we have our weekly live streamed reflection. I'm Edward Carter, the vicar here giving the reflection today. If you're visiting the church or perhaps visiting the charity card shop, please do carry on enjoying your visit, enjoy looking for Christmas cards as well. One of the more famous people who's buried here at this church is a man called Thomas Browne. Some time ago in the 17th century he lived. He was a physician, a philosopher, a natural scientist, what's sometimes called a polymath, which is a fancy interested in a lot of different things and knew a lot about them as well. Last week we had his day in the year, Thomas Browne Day, 19th of October, which is actually the day he was born and the day that he died by coincidence. He had, by all accounts, an amazing mind, could think about all sorts of things, and he was a prolific author as well. And he lived here in Norwich for almost all of his adult life. There's lots to enjoy about Thomas Browne, but one of the things I really love about him is that he coined new words. He kind of made up new words when he needed them to describe something or to use in some way. I'm going to give you a few examples of words that he coined and created. I think, like me, you'll probably be surprised because they're words that we use all the time, in fact. One of the words he coined was approximate. Very useful word, I have to say. That's approximately right. Well, Thomas Browne invented that ability to say that. On a medical theme, he invented the word medical. That didn't exist before him. Also, the word coma, the idea of being comatose, alive, but not awake, as it were. Also, the word electricity. A long time ago, way back in the 17th century, but he invented the word electricity. And even more amazing, considering he died in 1682, he apparently invented the word computer. I don't suppose he had a computer in the same way that we do, but he obviously understood what that word could mean and what it could convey. I looked this up, but in the Oxford English Dictionary, there are apparently 775 entries for words that Thomas Browne used for the first time. So he coined 775 new words at least, probably more, I should think. Anyway, as I enjoyed researching some of this, I had a bit of a thought, well, yes, how do new words come into being? And it's not something, I guess, that we think about all the time because we just use the words that we use. We hear someone else use them and we use them as well. But if you think about it, logically speaking, every word at some point had its moment of birth when it was first used. As language developed and as indeed the English language for us has changed over the centuries. And I suppose it takes a partnership of a creative mind, such as Thomas Browne, and also things happening in the world, things that are changing, new discoveries being made, new ways in which people look on things. That partnership of an inquisitive mind, a creative mind, along with just the stuff that happens in the world, can give rise to new words. And I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that each year there are new words still being created in the English language. Not, of course, by Thomas Browne anymore, but by others. And someone will have coined a new word that then comes into more general use. And I've just looked up a couple of rather contemporary examples the last year or two. One of them is contactless, as in how we pay for things using cards. That wasn't a word about 3 or 4 years ago, apparently. But someone at some point said, I'm going to go contactless today, and that was a word. And I have to say, a little bit earlier on today, that's exactly what I did. I went contactless and made a donation somewhere. Another one that is slightly foreboding, really. Apparently this is a new word, maybe it was last year rather than this year, or the year before. Doom scrolling. It's a bit of a long word. Doom scrolling, which is apparently a description of that obsessive scrolling through on your little phone, your smartphone, looking at news feeds which are full of doom and gloom, are they not always? So doom scrolling is when you end up, you've discovered you've spent half an hour looking through the bad news that is happening in the world. I'm not sure I'm keen on that word having been invented really, but I suppose it is a thing. One of the words that's used a lot, and by different people in slightly different ways, is the word woke. Of course, in one sense, it was an old word, meaning he or she woke up. But it came to be a new thing about 10 years ago, a new word really, meaning alert. Alert to prejudice, alert to discrimination. You're woke to something. But now, of course, it's used by people who don't like the whole agenda of people being woke, as in trendy and all the rest of it. I'm not going to get involved in those culture wars, but isn't it interesting how a word can be adapted and used in a new way and then end up being something of a controversial word as well? One of Thomas Browne's other new words was coexistence. And I have to say, I really like that word. That warms my heart. Coexistence. He obviously realised what an important thing it was for two things, or more than two things, or people, to be able to exist alongside one another, to coexist, to exist together. And I've been just thinking a little bit about that word, coexistence, quite a bit recently. Because it's a precious thing, is it not, in the world in which we live. We live in a strident world in many ways, a noisy world, a world full of strong opinions which people are determined shouldn't coexist with anything else. They're forceful in terms of how they're presented often. And we need only think of what's happening in the world today, the situation in Israel and Gaza, still in Ukraine with Russia. Those issues in the world, and so many others as well, and often on a much more local level, they arise in such a painful way because human beings don't seem to be able to coexist, don't seem to be able to live alongside one another. And I know these issues in the world are complicated, of course they are. There's no easy way of waving a wand and saying, well, let's just coexist, because there are deep matters of history, there are deep matters of justice, all sorts of reasons why it's difficult sometimes for people to get along peacefully. But as I pondered this, I kind of flipped into Thomas Browne mode and wondered if there might be yet another new word, one that hasn't really been invented yet, so perhaps you might even be the person who can invent it. A word that somehow combines the two other words and hopes. Peace, on the one hand, peace, and justice. Peace and justice. They're often used together. And in a way, they complement each other. Peace with justice, justice with peace. But they are quite different as well. Because you can have a peace that's kind of imposed or enforced in an unjust way. The strong power can impose a peace which doesn't feel just. Or you can have justice which is harsh, which is so harsh that it lacks any sense of peace as well. So although you can have the two separately, we often pray here in this church, I pray here in this church where I'm the vicar, for peace with justice, a kind of deep-rooted peace that is rooted in that sense of rightness and justice, I would say, under God. I don't think there is exactly an English word that conveys that, a single word. We can describe it, but I'm not quite sure there's a word that conveys it. I think there might be a word in the language that was used to write down the New Testament originally, Greek. 2,000 years ago, the New Testament was first written, as I say, in Greek. And there was a word that's used only a tiny handful of times. It sounds just like Greek, because it is, epiaikes. It doesn't mean anything in English, but it is a single, very short word which was used quite a lot in antiquity and was taken up in some of the letters and the Gospels in the New Testament. What does it mean, this word? Well, as far as I'm able to work it out, it means a sense of having a generous treatment of others that looks for fairness, but doesn't insist on the letter of the law. So it kind of has a gentleness about it, a graciousness. It has a sense of fairness, but it doesn't have a sense of force or imposition. Perhaps it has a blend of peace with justice, a blend of justice with peace. I don't know what that English word is. Maybe if we started using a new word to convey that sense of not just being able to coexist, which Thomas Browne invented hundreds of years ago, more than coexist, to live together in peace, but with justice as well. Who knows what that word might be? But my prayer, having reflected on all these things, is that that word might not just exist as a word, but that it might be a real thing in our hearts, in my heart, in our hearts, in people's hearts everywhere. And that we might not just coexist, but we might actually flourish alongside everyone, even the people that we sometimes find it hard to coexist with, that we might flourish together with that sense of peace and justice present for us. And I hope, if that's my prayer, that it might possibly, if you're a person who prays, be your prayer as well. Well, thank you for listening to my reflection today. Thank you as well to any who joined us online. Next week, next Wednesday at 1 o'clock, there'll be another reflection in our ongoing series. Thank you again.